Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the I'm Just a Journalist podcast. My name is Drew Berg, and I am a journalism student here at Minnesota State Moorhead. And on the weekends, I work as a TV reporter for the local ABC station, WDAY, here in the Fargo-Moorhead area. This is a podcast where I like to break down kind of what's going on in the news world, thoughts, opinions. If you saw last week, I even brought in Denise Gorsline, the chair of the School of Communication and Journalism here at MSUM, and we got to talk about some stuff, and that's just kind of the idea of this podcast, is to really be able to have a discussion about what's going on with the news. Excuse me. But today, I'm doing this one solo, and I want to talk about the kind of some issues that I have with the current state of sports media. Working in sports is something that I wanted to do since I was young, and that's kind of what directed me into journalism as the path to make that happen. I used to watch SportsCenter every day before school, and I was just enamored by what they were doing. I knew I wanted to work in sports, and I was like, oh, news is the way that I can do that. I knew I wasn't going to be an athlete, so I was like, hey, this way I can tell their stories. I could be on TV, which was a really cool idea at the time, and even talk with some of these star athletes. So from 6th grade on, that's kind of been what I wanted to do, and now that I've gotten to a point where I'm more knowledgeable about journalism, haven't done a whole lot of sports stuff quite yet, just because it's a really hard position to get into. A lot more places look for regular news people, so that's a lot of what I've been doing up to this point. But just with my few observations that I've made, and really just kind of seen from especially larger sports media, I think there's just a few things that I don't love to see. Starting off, especially looking at these big channels, I wish that I don't love the direction that they're moving in, and I think it's going in the way that the world's gone now, especially when it comes to news media. People love the idea of your regular person journalist that isn't just a suit sitting at a desk and talking about the news. And I think that extends into sports, that people like this idea of, oh, is my sports anchor reporter someone that I'd want to get a drink with or something like that. And I think that has its own understandable pieces to it, but I think that some places are swinging a little bit too far in that direction. For example, ESPN is a big one that I get kind of worried about now. Over the last decade especially, sports media has really been kind of a crazy thing, especially on YouTube. I have a lot of YouTubers that I watch, names like Tom Grossi, Brandon Perna, Brett Coleman, and there's a channel called Football Analysis that are some of my favorites on there. And they're great because you can get very specific niche areas of sports that don't necessarily get covered by those big channels, by those big markets, those big media companies. And I just think that a lot of those started doing so well that places like ESPN is like, oh, this is what they want, so let's do that. And I think it's valuable to a sense, but they might have overdone it. The key part that I see is it's two names specifically, Pat McAfee and Dave Portnoy. So the McAfee show got bought by ESPN a few years ago after the crazy success that it had been having on YouTube. It was this huge deal, and the moment that contract happened, ESPN made a very clear decision in what they wanted to do, that they wanted this casual idea of sports news. And I wasn't the biggest fan of it, and I still don't love it, because I loved going to ESPN and SportsCenter is because I could hear from people in the industry who would have the news immediately and be able to tell it, or some former players that were very well thought out and could get their messages out properly. Once you kind of have McAfee. I don't know the background of a ton of the guys on the show, and they seem like fun people. But now they're in a position where they're like professionals in the sports media business. And that show is just very casual and too casual, almost like a bunch of people at a bar just throwing stuff out there, and they just say things. And people take it and they run with it and they just say things and call me a boomer or something, but I don't love it because I don't think it's like, I don't go on television to watch conversations I'd have with my buddies from high school. I go on sports media television to learn about what's going on with these teams and just kind of the news and the numbers and the stats, stuff that I can't think of in my own head. I just think that kind of switched there where there's plenty of news that happens there, but it's just the environment is not the best, I think, for open sharing of information. So I don't love that. I think it's just kind of, it's just very different. And if I wanted a YouTube experience when it came to consuming my sports, I would just go to YouTube. I mentioned Dave Portnoy. He's the same thing on Big Noon Kickoff. They brought in a bunch of Barstool people to do a show on that, and then they just kind of act like frat boys. And I'm like, I don't want news from frat boys. I want news from reporters who have been working with teams and in the sport for years and have, base knowledge that they aren't just saying whatever comes to their head because that's what they think. I have issues with a lot of sports radio is because that's a lot of what it is. And I think as a journalist, truth and professionalism should be right up there. And this kind of way that it's gone isn't necessarily something that I love. And building on this point, on the especially kind of unprofessionalism point, maybe, is the increase in opinion-based sports journalism compared to like numbers, stories, whatever. I think too many journalists and journalism shows on places like ESPN are way too focused on the analysts. And I think some people have too big of a thought that people are there to watch them and not the information that they hold. And I think having, reporters with personalities can do a lot, and I think that's great. But at the end of the day, you're a reporter, or you're an anchor, or you're an analyst, something like that. And when I see a lot of what ESPN is producing these days, and I don't want to just call out ESPN specifically here because it's a lot of sports media as a whole, but ESPN, again, was always known as the pinnacle of what sports media is. And I think it's really kind of, with the direction that it has been going, that's not necessarily the case anymore. So much of news coverage, sports coverage now, is opinion-based and what the analyst thinks compared to, the stats that we see on the box score or anything like that. And I understand that box score watching is not necessarily a good thing either, that there's a lot of context, but I feel like it's the wrong context. I love sports debates. That's not what I'm trying to go after here, is debating sports, especially in a TV sense, because I think when you're very knowledgeable people about the sport, sports debates can be a very interesting thing. But the key point that I'm worried about is the last thing I said there. When you're very knowledgeable people, like, about the content, I don't think that's the case about a lot of these debates that happen. It's just people, honestly, like myself, that I only know what I heard through another reporter or maybe saw on a post on Twitter. I'm not in with these teams, so I don't know the background of why these things are happening. I used to love to watch First Take because I'd want to see what people would think back and forth about kind of the idea. First Take now is a completely different place where now they just try to bring in the biggest names guest, whatever they, the name value rather than what they know. So then you just have two people that are yelling about the thing that annoyed me. I'm biased. I like the Timberwolves. So the whole Lakers in 5 thing by Shannon Sharpe, I thought it was stupid, but I don't necessarily think that's just because I'm a Timberwolves fan. because when I'm on there, I'm like, you're a analyst for a national sports media company. You shouldn't just be actively rooting against teams at any point. I'm like, there's plenty of teams I don't like. I'm a Vikings fan, so I'm not here cheering for the Packers, but if I'm in a position like that, I'm not going to root against them for everything. One name that annoys me on the NFL Network side is Adam Rank. It's always about the Bears, and it's like, at some point, when are you not a YouTube channel? Like, where's the line between you just going to start your own channel where you can make it all about you compared to doing your job as a sports media person to just remain biased and down the middle? I just think the standards are different for sports, and I think that that's okay in some contexts, but like, people want nonpartisan news and real news here. They don't want someone, a lot of people are searching for someone that isn't, super left-leaning or right-leaning, or at least it's not obvious. They just want people to say what it is. And I think that's the issue with sports, is just because it's not, left or right, that people are like, okay, that's fine for sports. But I think it is an issue when you obviously have favorite teams. I have no problem with knowing that anchors have favorite teams. It's just a different idea when they show it. I think I don't want to have someone who goes through and only chooses their favorite team and actively always picks against rivals. I could just keep naming names, honestly, when I think of people that I don't love. It's college football people. Some of them are very stuck that their conference is the best, so they'll do whatever they do in that kind of idea. And it just gets really annoying when I just want to look and see stats. I love film breakdowns. I want to see that and what they're seeing, and I'm not going to sit here and say it's all lost, because there's plenty of people that are also really good at it. But I'm like, that group that's all opinions and what I think and this and that and the other thing is getting bigger. That it's kind of hard to really break down, like, what is actual sports news, or how do I know that this person doesn't just, have an old rivalry with this player from their playing days and now they're still beefing about it, because there's a lot of that and it gets really, really tired really, really fast. So I think that that's just another thing that I really wish would get better, and it would make it easier to consume sports, I think, when you feel like you're able to just take in the information, because that should really be the main point of news, is to be informative. I don't know anything about a lot of NHL teams. I don't know a lot about a lot of NBA teams. MLB, it's the same way. I'm a NFL, I think I have a pretty decent idea about a lot of stuff, but it's like I still don't know a lot of the ins and outs. Go on NFL Live and break down film, like do a film breakdown of Cam Ward. I would love that, because I don't watch Titans games, but I want to learn more about the game, or do that. Or the same kind of idea of go through how the last month has gone for, X player on the Miami Heat. I don't watch the Miami Heat, but I like basketball, I like sports, so I want to stay up with it. So go through that and let me hear that. Don't tell me that, don't start a debate about who the college football playoff teams should be based off your opinion, because that's all those end up being. Don't just start a random debate about, who's the greatest player of all time, or should this player get traded, or this or that, or what's the problem with this team, even though we don't have anyone in that locker room, so we don't really know. That's just kind of my issue with it, is I just want the information, and that, I think, does tie into kind of the casual professional side of it. It's like, we're sports. It's awesome. I love even thinking about the chance to work in sports, and I've only done it a little bit, and I've loved every moment that I have. But it's just remembering that while it's sports news, it's still news, and there's still steps that need to be taken. And I think unless ESPN is really ready to throw the news tag out the door, I don't think, which I think would be a bad idea, because that's kind of what they've been rolling with since they started, 47 years ago or whatever it was. I just think that there's some introspective thinking that needs to happen there about the direction that this is going. But now that I broke down my issues with a lot of it, it would be irresponsible for me to not say what I think should be done to make it better. And I want to be a lot more specific than just say, go back to the way things were, because I know that it's more complicated than that. But in my opinion, the way that I would kind of look at it is draw harder if I was a place like ESPN specifically, draw harder boundaries between what is your news content and what is other content. As in, like, I think First Take has a place as a show. When I would consume that SportsCenter thing, or SportsCenter before school, I wouldn't hate coming across First Take because it would be interesting to hear what other people think. I think opinions are a valuable thing, especially when it comes to former players or analysts and stuff like that. But I think drawing harder lines will be the place to do that. So SportsCenter, go back to box scores and, highlights. I love the idea of at the local level, at the local level, when it comes to sports, you see people doing like formal news packages, doing stories. I wish that was highlighted more when it comes to these big national media companies. When you're working with a national canvas, there's a million stories. There's probably crazy stories that you can pull. So I think that leaning more into that, looking at how a typical newscast goes, doing it like that, except obviously just change it to sports. So have a story about, the backstory of player X and how they got here. Let's just think of some news stories here. I've seen stories about DeAndre Hopkins. I believe it's his mom that's blind, and he would always give her a football or be his aunt or something like that. So that's the kind of story is in there, kind of that family connection. Or say there's a player who's from college basketball. There's a lot of players that come over from different countries and play. So highlight a player that has an interesting story about how they came from their home country to play in college and do that. One story that I came across was on YouTube, actually, was about Hawaii's kicker and how he's Japanese, I believe, and kind of how he ended up where he's at. He taught himself how to kick from YouTube. These are just 3 examples of stories that I've seen other outlets cover that I think would be better to do. So I think leaning into more storytelling like that would be huge. And then otherwise SportsCenter, there may be a little bit of quick analysis. In that, I also think film breakdowns. I'm just really nerdy like that though, so maybe that wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea, but I think the basic point of drawing harder lines to really kind of break it down and have kind of that open and being able to allow both debate while having a space for people who don't want debate to just be able to get the news where they can decide for themselves. I look at the ESPN that I grew up with, and it was that kind of SportsCenter before it really became, a ton of analysis. And First Take was there, and I think the reason that maybe First Take, I don't love it as much anymore, is because that debate setting is just everywhere now. So then it's kind of like, well, why would I watch the show about debates when there's other shows that are debates plus news? So I think that's kind of an idea there. But I think about it, and there was Around the Horn, which had a very debate. The scoring system never made sense, but that one was interesting. I liked that because it was able to highlight different reporters. Highly questionable was the fun one, I would say. Obviously, I think a lot of people my age that were into sports look fondly at highly questionable. But PTI, pardon the interruption, is one that I love because I think it does the best at just being news. There's a little bit of analysis, or not necessarily analysis. There's a little bit of opinions and debate, but that's just because Wilbon and Wilbon and Kornheiser. It's because, sorry, I'm not great at names. Tony and Wilbon are great at being able to stay kind of down the middle when it comes to stuff like that. And then it would just be back with SportsCenter, and it would just be able to do that. So I think kind of partially looking back at what it was and understanding the lines to draw. There's Pat McAfee, you know what, if you're going to have him, fine. But again, just draw the lines. Just make it like, here's a news show. They're just blending everything into everything, and I think that's hurting their programming, is because now it just all blends all day long, that it's hard to really go for any of it. So I wish that, that would be my one way to do it, is draw harder boundaries and have news shows where you do storytelling and just talk about box scores and some highlights, and have those debate shows and allow that, and maybe have that casual setting, but it just, everything's blended together, and I think people don't love it now. And I think that that would be kind of the way to solve the main issues that I broke down kind of today, was that it's just like, again, I don't love the professionalism kind of where it's at right now. I wish that, again, this is network TV, so understanding that it's not a YouTube channel, just kind of like, there's insane resources that can go to this stuff. So use them, get those deeper stories, do that, and make sure you're just bringing in kind of the right people is the other point I wanted to make there, is there's a lot of players that they'll bring in, former players, I should say, that they don't, I think, do a good job, enough job of vetting that there aren't like bias. There's countless players that have well-known beefs with former players, and then they'll just spotlight that, and this player will say like, this player is not as good as everyone says he is, he constantly underrate players because they just don't like them personally, and I think that's an issue as well. So I would mainly kind of think that that would be another thing to look forward, is just be like, hey, make sure, I know everyone's got an opinion, but when you put it on sports TV with hundreds of thousands of viewers, make sure that's an opinion that's actually grounded in proper context and numbers and analysis and stuff like that, because I think ESPN has also let that go, where they just let the biggest names, the most notable names on there, whether they're going to do a good job or not. But that's kind of my 20-plus minute rant, looking over at my timer right now, and I don't expect anyone with any power to change anything at ESPN to see this. But if one of you stumbles across this, maybe take what I said into consideration. I think I loved ESPN, and it's really kind of bumming me out that maybe it's not working out, because it's getting kind of hard to find places that do really work for proper sports media. So yeah, but again, this was my my rant on the current place of big industry sports media, and kind of stuff I think should be done with it. But again, if you've made it this far, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in to the I'm Just a Journalist podcast. I'm hoping to have another episode out pretty soon here. But again, so thank you guys for checking it out, and I hope you have a great week. See ya.